Hello and welcome to Stay for Dinner, a podcast of cooking, curiosity, and conversation. If you love cooking, you hate cooking, you don't know how you feel about cooking because you've never tried it before, or literally anywhere in between, congratulations, you're in the right place. I'm your host, DC Pierson. I'm a comedian, author, enthusiastic home cook, and tonight I'm going to be hosting a podcast that is also a tiny dinner party in my pretty tiny Los Angeles apartment. My guest for both of those things is the inimitable Emily V. Gordon. She's the co-writer of The Big Sick. She co-created Little America on Apple TV Plus, and she is all around just a cool and wonderful person. And Emily and I will be dining on Fettuccine Alfredo with homemade pasta. I've never made homemade pasta before, but I've also never made this podcast before, so let's do this. Okay, so first we're going to check our ingredients for the fresh pasta. First up, I'm working off of an article called How to Make Fresh Pasta Like a Chef by Josh Cohen on Food 52. And I am going to be utilizing 1 2/3 cups of flour and 2 eggs because we're going to be making it for 2 people. And he was saying the guidelines are basically 100 grams of flour and 1 egg per person, give or take. And then I kind of calculated that out to how much that would be in cups. Google knows how to do all this stuff. Just let it. And then our ingredients for Fettuccine Alfredo, and I'm working off of Kenzie Wilbur's recipe, also on Food 52. For 2 servings, we're going to need half a pound of fettuccine. We're actually going to be making that, but if you're using store-bought, that's usually like half the package. 2 cups of heavy cream. Little tip if you didn't know, when it says heavy whipping cream, that's just the cream. It's just not whipped. It's the same thing. Then we're going to be using like a little less than a cup of Parmesan cheese. It'll probably just round up to a cup. A tablespoon of butter, black pepper, just in general, and parsley that we're going to be sprinkling on top at the end. And equipment-wise, we're going to be utilizing a bowl, like a decent sized mixing bowl, a big pot for doing the pasta in, a somewhat smaller pot for finishing the fettuccine alfredo in, and a big old spoon to stir with, and a colander. So I'm going to start by making the fresh pasta, and if you want to cook along at home but you don't necessarily feel up to tackling fresh pasta today, that is totally cool. There will be a distinct point where I shift into making the fettuccine alfredo, and at that point you can totally do these same steps with dry pasta, store-bought fresh pasta, basically whatever you want to do. But hopefully part of what we'll learn here today is that homemade fresh pasta is easy and fun. We can't learn that until we do it and have that experience, hopefully. So here goes nothing. All right, so I'm going to start by measuring out the flour. I'm just using all-purpose flour. 1 cup and 2/3. And then after I've measured out the flour, I am going to kind of make a little well in the middle with my fingers. Looks like it's a little like volcano or something. And then into that well, I am going to crack a couple of eggs, which anytime I've ever seen pasta being made looks like a really fun part. I guess we will find out if that's true. Seems like it. All right, I'm gonna crack the eggs like as close as possible to the well because I want them to actually get in there. 1 egg and 2 eggs. Okay, and it immediately overrode the side of my well. We're just gonna go with it. So I guess what we're learning here is we want that well to be really deep. But so theoretically, you have your 2 eggs in your well, kind of use a fork to beat them, and then basically use that same fork to kind of slowly fold in and mix in the flour that you have in the bowl, so the volcano and the lava of the volcano kind of become one thing. Mixing in, and now at this point I'm kind of just beating the whole thing, trying to work this stuff all in together. And then once it's relatively incorporated, I'm going to just kind of start working it there in the bowl with my hands, trying to incorporate everything. It's still kind of a little bit piecey, like everything's kind of, there's one big mass, and then there's a bunch of little kind of floury, eggy parts. Oh, maybe I should have floured my hands first. That might have been a good idea. We'll know for next time. There we go. Kind of just trying to work it into like one singular ball of dough, and incorporating as much of what we have here in the bowl as possible. All right, once that's done, I'm going to take it out of the bowl and kind of leave any little tiny floury random parts that are still in the bowl and put it out on a clean surface, in this case my kitchen table. And before I do that, actually, I'm going to cover that surface in just a little bit more flour. Some flour on my table here. Take out my dough ball, and now I am just going to kind of knead it. And when I say knead, I don't have a ton of dough experience in general, to be honest with you. I'm not a big baker. So basically how I'm choosing to interpret knead is just kind of taking the dough ball and then putting it on its side, pressing down, and then flipping it over and doing it over and over again. And the idea here is that we want it to become one kind of like pretty homogenized mass, so it's not like a bunch of flour and a bunch of eggs, like it's just one thing, like it's a dough. It is what it is, and it ain't what it ain't. And in the recipe, Josh describes picking it up early on in the process, and if you kind of stretch it, it'll like tear, right? And supposedly, if we keep going here, as we do it, when we check again in like 10 or so minutes of kneading, it'll be less that way. It'll be less likely to tear because it'll be more homogeneous. So I read a book by the first assistant director of a bunch of movies, but a big part of the book is about he was the first assistant director on Apocalypse Now, and he described how he knew that all the guys on this camera crew, because the cinematographer was Italian, I won't venture to guess his name. I want to say maybe it was Vittorio De Sica, but not sure. Anyway, he knew that there were a ton of guys being paid to be on the camera crew, but then he would be like, wait a minute, every day I go and I know there's supposed to be like 7, 8 guys, but then I only go and I see like 4 or 5 guys. Where are these other guys? I'm just never seeing them. And then one night they were filming over in Vietnam or Cambodia, and the cinematographer is like, hey, come over to our house, whatever. So he goes over to the Italian cinematographer's house, and all the people on the camera crew are there, and he's like, who are these other guys I've never seen before? There's 2 Italians in the kitchen, and they're just making pasta and stirring sauce and whatever. And the cinematographer's like, oh yeah, those are the other guys on my crew. I, say they're on the camera crew, but this is their entire job. I love that so much. Maybe if I get good enough at making fresh pasta, I can be the guy that's on the camera crew but doesn't know anything about cameras, because I definitely don't. Something extremely meditative about this. I gotta be honest with you guys. When I started this process, I was pretty nervous. It's my first time doing the podcast, whatever. I'm like moving around my kitchen with a little lav mic on. And I've only been doing this for like 4, 5 minutes maybe. And I'm already very chilled out. But it doesn't take no upper body strength. Maybe this is less about kneading pasta being relaxing and more about exercise being good for you. There's just no way to tell. We'll see in the final product, but I don't think that my 2 eggs overrunning the sides of my volcano ended up being as consequential as I feared it might at the beginning. I really did. Sometimes that's just the case. You just never sort of know if things are going to have a huge effect later on down the line, or if it's just sort of like, that was just aesthetic. So I'm I'm glad I kept going with it. All right, it's been about 9-10 minutes. My dough is feeling very homogeneous and just like a singular ball of itself. So I'm gonna go ahead and try that little rip test again. I'm gonna pick it out and kind of just lightly spread it with my fingers. Oh yeah, it's not tearing nearly as much as it was at the beginning. So just gonna give it a few more presses down with the palms for good luck. And then we'll be on to a very exciting stage called doing nothing. Now that my dough is homogeneous, I'm just gonna kind of let it sit and rest for about 30 or more minutes and just let it hang out. All right, my timer just went off and now it is time to roll out the pasta. So I'm gonna uncover my plastic wrap here, and then I am going to, oh yeah, look at that dough ball. And then I'm going to, let's go ahead and roll this out. Just kind of trying to roll in all directions. And I guess if you didn't have a rolling pin, you could use like, I don't know, a wine bottle or something. Just, you know, go easy. If you're super strong, you don't want palms full of broken glass and red wine and ruined pasta. That would be the biggest tragedy. Okay, so I've been rolling in kind of in all directions for about 5 minutes now. I'm adding flour occasionally to try to keep the pasta from sticking to the rolling pin. And I'm having more success kind of just going slowly and pushing down hard. It seems to want to spring back a little bit every time, but on some of these edges I'm getting it pretty thin. I just need to figure out how to do that for all of it. And all right, so I've been rolling for about 5 to 6 to 7 or so minutes now, and the thing is kind of about the thinness of a medium pizza, maybe small pizza. Looks pretty good, so I'm just going to go ahead and roll it up. I'm going to roll it into like a flat log from the bottom here, and just kind of flipping it, turning it over itself from the bottom. All right, and then now that I have laid out the log, charming turn of phrase, I am going to go ahead and cut it from one side into fettuccine. Fettuccine means ribbons, going from one side here and cutting it into pasta. And I'm cutting them about the thinness of almost a little thinner than, like about the thinness of a number 2 pencil, I think. All right, down to the other end of the log, and then I'm just gonna add a little bit more flour over top here so they don't stick to each other. And then I am, oh wow, yeah. Those are little pastas. I think I maybe, if I had it to do over again, I would have maybe tried to roll them out a little thinner, just like put my back into it a little bit more. They ended up being a little bit thicker than I thought they would based on how it felt when I was rolling it out. But what can you do? They're not sticking to each other. And that, you can't tell me that's not pasta. That's pretty cool. I haven't, yeah, I feel like I've accomplished something and I haven't even finished the dish yet. All right, so now that we have the pasta made, we are going to go ahead and do our steps to make fettuccine Alfredo. This is the part where you can jump in if you aren't going to make fresh pasta today, but you still want to make fettuccine Alfredo. I highly recommend it. I'm going to start by filling filling like a large pot, maybe about 1/3 of the way up with water, maybe a little more, maybe like half. A decent amount of kosher salt. One guideline that I really like is Samin Nosrat of Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat says you want your pasta water to be salty like the sea, which really just feels like it gives you permission to put a heck of a lot of salt in there, and I like that. Now that we have our salted water on the boil, I am going to chop up the parsley that we are ultimately going to top this thing with. So I ultimately have, like a tablespoon and a half of chopped parsley. And I feel like for whatever reason, there's like a big, you don't hear as much about curly parsley anymore. It's all about the Italian flat leaf parsley. If you want to reach for the curly parsley, I'm not going to fault you for it. So I'm going to put my parsley in a little bowl next to where I'll be plating up the dishes. And next I am going to grate some fresh Parmesan cheese, or Parmesan as they call it on the Great British Baking Show. And do they ever? And if you have it, I mean, obviously you could use the pre-grated Parmesan, but supposedly they put like sawdust or something in it to keep it from sticking together when they have like pre-grated cheese of any kind. And when you really want your cheese to melt, which obviously we do in this dish, that is going to mess with the melting, like whatever additives or something. I don't know if it's literally sawdust, but whatever additives they put in there, it's just worth it to grate fresh. And now I'm going to take my little less, maybe a little more than a cup of grated Parmesan, and I'm going to put that next to the oven, or the stove rather, because that is where it is going to be called into service. And I have my pepper and my 1-ish tablespoons of butter next to my cheese on the side of the stove. I mean, you don't have to do this, but I just kind of like having everything like ready at hand in a little like cockpit scenario. That way, when you're, I don't know how to extend the cockpit metaphor in terms of this, but basically when you're in the heat of stuff and you're at the stove and things are happening, it's nice to have everything that you need already kind of like measured out and at hand. And then I am going to add my 2 cups of cream to my other pot or my skillet, depending on what I want to finish the fettuccine alfredo in. In this case, I have opted for a skillet with some decently high sides. So I want to bring the cream to what she describes in the recipe as a scant boil. I think basically that means like, it's boiling, but as soon as it is, we're going to turn it down to a simmer. So I've got my stove on like a medium-high heat, and it shouldn't take very long, so I want to definitely pay attention because we don't want the cream to scald. Oh wow, a giant bubble is forming on the surface of the cream. Like the top has formed like a little bit of a skin, and then there's like a large air bubble boiling up underneath it. It could only be described as Cronenbergian. All right, so we're gonna call this a scant boil. I'm gonna move the heat down a little bit and just kind of adjust it until it's simmering, and we're gonna simmer until it reduces down by about half. And now I definitely feel like we have a simmer going, lots of little bubbles in lots of little places, but not that, big boil that we definitely don't want. All right, so I'm feeling like my cream has reduced by about half. If you don't stir it around a lot, you can kind of just judge by sort of what you see on the side of the pan. There's like where the high water line was and how much it's gone down. I ended up stirring mine around quite a bit just to try to break up that skin at the top. So, which I don't know that that's necessarily necessary. It mostly just seemed fun and pleasing to do. And it was. My cream just reduced by half. I'm gonna put that heat on low just so it stays warm. And even as we speak, the water is coming to a boil. I suppose if that hadn't worked out that way, I could just kind of keep an eye on the cream and lower the heat and just kind of wait for the water to come up, but they seem to have happened synchronously. Okay, I'm gonna take my fresh pasta ribbons and put them in the boiling water. And fresh pasta really doesn't need to cook for very long. You're just kind of looking at like 1 to 3 minutes, honestly. But since these are a little bit on the thicker side, I'm gonna let them go for, definitely more on the 3 minutes side, because, there's raw egg in there. I wanna cook it. And I'm just gonna stir my fresh fettuccine around a little bit in the water just to make sure it doesn't stick together. Not too big of a risk of that, I feel like, because they're covered in flour, but you never know. All right, I think my pasta's getting to be about done. I'm just gonna fish one out here and bite it. Ooh, yeah, they're pretty big. So I rolled them out pretty thick and didn't necessarily know that I was doing it. Now I feel like in the water, they're definitely getting even thicker. So these are gonna be some pretty rustic, I don't know if we're dealing with ribbons, and I don't know what the Italian word for larger than a ribbon is. It's like an ultra fettuccine, I think. And that's okay. And now that I like where my pasta's at, I'm gonna go ahead and drain it into a colander carefully and add it to my cream that has reduced. Stir it around, get it in the cream, and I'm gonna add the butter. And then handful by handful, I'm gonna add my Parmesan so that melts in there. I like to add the cheese in handful by handful because I feel like that helps it melt and get incorporated rather than becoming one big glob. The recipe's not calling for any added salt. I think maybe that's because Parmesan has a lot on its own. So we're gonna taste it at the end, and if it feels like it needs some, we'll go ahead and throw it in there. And while we're still in the pan here, I'm gonna turn the heat up because I feel like that's gonna help marry everything together. Don't wanna cook the pasta a ton more, just kinda wanna get everything all working together. Sauce is really starting to thicken up now that cheese is getting in there. We're gonna add a little bit of pepper now that all my butter and cheese is in there. This is timing out really well. Emily's getting here in just a few minutes. Just gonna take a little taste and make sure that I like the salt and pepper level. Could use a little bit of salt, I think. Add a little bit more and stir it in. All right, the salt is now where I want it. Okay, just gonna dish this out into 2 plates and top it with our parsley that we laid out before. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. All right, here comes Emily, I think. So we'll just see how this goes. How's it going, Emily? Hi.
Oh, tiny dinner party. I immediately got anxious.
And we don't even have wine. Oh God. So Emily, this evening I have made for us Fettuccine Alfredo with homemade pasta. It is my first ever attempt at homemade pasta. So we will see how it goes. Emily and I are going to eat this real quick, and then we're going to talk about it, about food and cooking and everything food and cooking are related to, which is everything. Last little.
That's why it's absolutely amazing, and I desperately want to finish it, but I do have to eat another full meal, which is why I'm not finishing.
I completely understand. So Emily and I have just finished eating our Fettuccine Alfredo.
Magnifique.
And our discussion of our favorite emoji, we basically determined, or our most used emoji, I'm wink. And Emily is
monkey stress face.
Stressed out monkey face, like the tight smile that isn't really bending at the corners. And then we transitioned into a entire RuPaul's Drag Race podcast that you guys will have to subscribe to separately. So Emily, I would ask you first off, I guess, what was just like your experience of the meal?
It was quite lovely. I thought the food was delicious. I thought that the Alfredo had sometimes Alfredo can be kind of heavy for me and feel like a little weighed down and almost greasy. And this had a very light, but like very fulfilling. The pasta was amazing.
Oh, good.
I have not had often like actual homemade pasta. It was great. And then I'm very fond of, is this parsley on top?
It is parsley on top.
Parsley on top really set it off.
I would say if there was one thing, I don't want to get into like hacks and stuff right away, but I would say like if you are listening and you are somebody who cooks, I feel like if you're making anything that's Italian or pretty much otherwise, throw a little parsley on top at the end. It just like really
It makes it seem
good to great.
Yeah.
Just in terms, yes, exactly. That
Yeah,
it makes that exact noise on the plate where it's just like, ooh, food. Here we go. Or I think it makes from like plate of food to like dish.
It's plated.
It's exactly.
It's gone
plated,
to plated.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we almost veered into talking about it when we were eating, but basically I was saying like I enjoyed it. I definitely, and this like I said, this is my first time making homemade pasta. I definitely have notes for myself.
Yeah. So how did you enjoy the meal?
I liked it. I would say it was so funny where I was thinking about like, oh, this is going to be great because I've never made homemade pasta before, but I just in general can't stop making pasta stuff. In general, like
really? That's your main jam.
I have to work to avoid making pasta for every single meal because it's always great, and who doesn't like it? You know what I mean? Like nobody's ever like, oh man, pasta again?
Gross.
Yes, exactly. Or like the saddest Italian kid in the Bronx in the 50s is like, oh man.
Sometimes
but
I just want Japanese food.
The first celiac. But I do, I definitely like. I ultimately would have rolled it out a little thinner. It was a little bit tough to roll out, and then so it ended up being sort of modern arty and rustic a little bit.
This is, by the way, the shape that I often think pasta's too thin, and I kind of want it thicker, and so I was like, oh, this is a cool, and it to me as not a pasta aficionado, it kind of lent a more of like a rustic artisanal, like this is better than normal shit because it was thicker. I would say
interesting.
That's what my brain did. I was like, oh, DC's got tricks. That's literally
wow, that's really, I mean, that is cool. And I do think goes to like, for me, the cooking in general is filled with like analogs to the creative process. And it's something that I like write and I do different stuff creatively, but I mostly, until doing this podcast, I guess, just strictly cook like for fun. It's just a way to like turn my brain off. And then it's very defined and you get to do a certain number of steps and then it's done. And then you have something to eat. But I do think one thing that I was trying to bring from my creative practice that I struggle with into this experience was like, don't like front porch this. Like, don't throw it down on the table and be like, it fucking sucks. I screwed up. You guys. Yeah, don't sort of like.
Yeah, don't tell people what they're going to eat.
Exactly. Not jaded, rock-kicking teen behind the 7-Eleven.
This really sucks, but if you want to.
I don't even freaking care if my dad shows up. I don't even freaking care. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that to the meal. And I think then ultimately, you're saying like, oh, I actually really liked it, or I thought that was intentional. I feel like there's a good lesson there for me of just sort of like, not from porching. It was a good idea to not set the expectation of like, here's a fucked up thing. Here's a C- thing at best in my estimation. So your experience of it, whatever that is going to be.
But then
wrong.
I'd just be like comforting you that, oh, no, it's great.
Yeah.
That's what I was like. There's very little chance, to be honest, that I would come in here and be like, this food sucks. There was like, I wasn't ever going to do that because I also just really like food. And you know what I mean? Like, I like to eat food and I like when people prepare me food. And I'm kind of like, what a magical thing that is. Who am I? So I do really like it. But there was also, you're making me dinner? You're amazing. Why would I ever be like, this is a C-?
I will say too, like I just read this book where about catering, and the guy in it was describing like catering being like, basically like a big slog because he was like working in this prep kitchen where he would just like, they'd be like, go over, chop that basil. Now go mince that garlic. Now go make these like tuiles of fucking, I don't know, Parmesan or whatever. But he never saw it actually get applied to any of the food. And he was contrasting that with like being a home cook and just being like I think how he put it was something to the effect of basically like every like the small amount of time that you spend like in the kitchen or at the cutting board or whatever yielded a like at the very least like a social victory where it's sort of like you're cooking for people and then people for the most part go like sweet, like have that reaction that you had. So it's like I do think it's a neat thing for many reasons, but for one of those reasons is just like rarely are people like, even if it is the kind of thing where everybody can kind of tell like this was not what was intended. I feel like for the most part people are like they genuinely really appreciate
Absolutely.
the effort, and then you get to facilitate like hanging out with somebody cool who you don't see very often otherwise, which is the case with us. We're friends, but I have not seen you in a while.
It's been
and
a long
I think
time.
like that's the reason that I I wanted to call the podcast Stay for Dinner is because like, remember when you were a kid and you're like, your friend was over and then they were like, well, it's time for your friend to go home and you're like, oh, can so-and-so stay for dinner? You know what I mean? Like that is like a way to spend more time with friends or family or people who you enjoy. It's a fun thing in and of itself. And food is obviously great, but all that stuff is kind of ephemeral. It's a good way to like build experiences. So all that to say like, I'm glad you liked it and I'm glad you could do this. Where would you say like cooking fits in or does not fit into your life at this moment, if at all?
I don't cook very often. I've been cooking slightly more, but I don't have the connection to cooking that you do whatsoever, where I don't have it's ingredient. I don't feel like it's a way to express my creativity at all. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like, if anything, it's like here's all the ways you're going to fuck this up. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's so many ways to fuck it up. And I'm not a very good cook. I'm a better baker slightly. And I bake when I'm really stressed out.
Interesting.
But I don't bake that often either. Not that I'm not stressed out, because we all are. The world's falling apart. Yes. But I don't bake. It's like what I go to when it's like, I don't know what else to do with myself.
Sure.
I'm going to bake. And so, yeah, I like eating food a lot, but I don't have I wasn't fostered like a thing of like cooking's a way to care for those around you. Like I can cook a couple of things and like for Kumail, like it's not like a thing where he comes home and I'm like, honey, the food's ready. It's just never been and he's kind of not like that either. So we order out quite a bit or we'll cook together. But yeah, I just don't have, I wish my brain worked in that way where I was like, this is a way to care for people and a creative thing to do.
Right.
The idea of cooking dinner for friends is so scary to me. It is very scary to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think like, it's interesting that you say, oh, I don't do it as a way to sort of like show love, or that's not really how I like process it, or that's not where cooking is filed away in my brain. Because when I think of baking, I think most people, when they sort of imagine almost the kind of like cookie cutter, for lack of, I guess.
Good Lord.
Thank you. Like stereotypical sort of like, like I guess in this case, it is a woman sort of like Betty Crocker figure, sort of like pulling cookies out of the oven, like baking. It's baking. It's not even cooking. Like they're imagining that sort of like warm kind of like cookies are ready, kids.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so it's like, what is it like in your head? Because I do feel like because I don't bake very much, and when I imagine, I do think of like, and then you're pulling out this warm thing and everybody digs in.
I think it's two things. One, it is that thing you were saying where there's so much of our work is ephemeral and that you don't create something. You don't physically create something. So I like the idea that like when I'm really stressed out and I feel, frankly, I'll say out of control, when I'm like, I don't feel like I have enough control over what's happening in my life. What I know is I can take these 5 ingredients and then I can make cookies out of them. And there will be 32 cookies here when I'm done. And that is how it will be. So I'm like, I can make something because I've never had a job where like I physically make something. Right. I just haven't ever, I was a barista when I was 16, never mind.
Nice.
But I think that's part of it. And I also think too, there is a thing, I've gone through bouts of like, not like when I was little, it was definitely comfort yourself with food. And I still go through the motions of that, but I don't even need to eat the food. I don't need to eat what I'm baking. I don't need anyone else to eat what I'm baking. I just need to bake it.
Right.
I just want to look at it when it's done. It's not a thing where I'm like, and then I eat all the cookies, but it would have been maybe like 15, 20 years ago.
Sure.
So now it's like a thing of like, I think I'm going through the part of the motions of like an unhealthy coping mechanism and then stopping before I get to the unhealthy part. I just figured that out.
But in a weird way, I feel like that's one way to look at it. But I also feel like I think people I've talked to who cook a little bit, or maybe it's like you're single, so you're only cooking for one person, which people sometimes like struggle with, or sort of like, it sort of makes sense. Like that idea where you're a little bit, I don't know, like just what I guess I mean to say is like that thing of going like, I put all this effort into something and then I make it and then it's gone in, 5 minutes max, and then you're sort of like, or like if you're watching TV, you're kind of like, oh, what's happening on Drag Race? And then you look up and the cold open's over and you're like, wait, I ate it. Yeah. It took 5 hours.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it's like on the one hand, I get what you mean in terms of like, I stop before the sort of like quote unquote gratification part or the unhealthy gratification part, which is one way to look at it. But I also think in a weird way, it's almost like that feels super duper healthy to me, not just in a sense of like, you didn't eat 16 cookies, but also healthy in a sense of like, weirdly in a kind of like stoic way, I guess, of like separating yourself from the output. And it's just like,
yeah.
I just like the process.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It is
Where
the
it's
process.
like, obviously it's like for reasons of, you know, the concept of like quote unquote starving children in Africa that like, I know my mom always used to hold over us when we were kids if we didn't finish everything we ate or whatever. But like you would want to like have somebody eat the food so it wasn't wasted. But I do think there's still a good practice, or it's the idea that you're not going to necessarily worry about where it goes after you're done doing the part that you really enjoy.
Yes.
Is cool.
Yes. And I have put cookies in a Ziploc container and then put them where the homeless people gather in my neighborhood.
That's great.
And just because I want you guys to know how great I am. Thank you. Where do I pick up my award? But I do, like, because I have had a thing of like, well, I don't want to waste these
And there are people next door who would kill you for that. And they're wrong.
I've got yelled at by neighbors for putting stuff outside. But yeah, because I was like, how often do they get to eat home-baked cookies? I don't know. And then once I did offer a bag to a homeless woman in my neighborhood, and she was like, no. And I was like, okay, cool.
Fair enough.
I thought I was pretty good at this, but no. But I do, yeah, it's like I just kind of want... It's the process. It is absolutely, when I play video games, I also enjoy like process video games that are like strategic management and like moving your shit around and how much, like, I'm a resource management kind of girl. And I think baking is kind of my version of that. Yeah.
I know you don't have a Tinder profile, and I've never been on Tinder, but I feel like that's a good Tinder bio.
Do you think I would get laid off that?
Kind of girl.
Who do you think would want to plow
me? It depends on what you're holding in the photo. Like if you're holding a big stack of cash, then yes. If you're holding wheat, then I don't know.
Just leaned up against a big tiger, a big sleeping tiger.
She's managing tigers. That's a resource. What's like your go-to sort of like, without even having to think about it or look up a recipe, like this is what I'm baking?
Okay, my go-to thing that I can cook a tagine, and I know I'm now switching back to cooking.
Sure.
But I can cook a tagine pretty quickly and easily, and it's a recipe that I just found randomly did, and I have done it enough times that like I can do it. Yeah.
Without even having to like, you could be at the store, not have to Google it on your phone and just like grab the stuff.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So it is what they call a like back pocket recipe for you.
And it's one that Kumail really likes. And so I cook it. And to me, that's the thing of if we've been out of town a bunch, that's what we're home. Now we're home because I wouldn't cook anywhere else we were, even if we're there for like a while. So it's like, oh, we're home. I'll cook. So it's like we're back home. That's it. That's the only time I'll cook it. But I've probably done it like 10 times.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah. I feel like.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that is, I've heard that or I've read that in like interviews with like people who are musicians or whatever. It's like, I think for a lot of people who do a lot of traveling for work, the idea of being able to cook, like getting home and being like, okay, I'm home for a while. I'm going to like go to the store and replace the things that have gone stale in my pantry. And then I can know that I might get to use them enough times before I have to go out again.
Yeah, it's a good feeling.
I've heard that a lot from people who travel a lot for work, is this idea of like cooking, not even just as cooking in and of itself, but as a sort of way to say like, I'm home. Thank God I get to be home for a while. I get to be here with the people I love. Yeah. And so it's just a way of, it's almost like a statement where it's like, I can get stuff from the store and I might be able to use an entire thing of milk.
It's a little bit like peeing on your territory again. Like you kind of have to feel like you remark it. Although I've also, Kumail was shooting something in New Orleans. So we were there and I was kind of going back and forth, but I bought stuff to like cook in that apartment. I was like, what a fun thing I'll do. He was working nights and just turned into a full lunatic. It's really hard to work every like nights. Like he was not making sense. But I tried to cook and I realized that, you don't have control over like the cooking utensils that other people have. And it was just like a guy that still had his like college stuff whose like Airbnb we were staying in. And it was like I burnt everything. And I was like, I shouldn't do this. This is not a good idea.
It is definitely a fantasy that I have of sort of like being in another city. I guess it's always Paris. I'm just thinking of Paris. I'm wearing a scarf. You know what I mean? Where it's just sort of like, and then you go to the market and you pick up a little of this and a little of that. In New Orleans, I can imagine totally being that kind of city. Maybe also too, because like the French thing. But I completely know what you mean, where it's like the fantasy of cooking in someone else's kitchen and the reality of like, where's my shit?
So many beer koozies that guy had. He had so many beer koozies and like only one pan, and it was like rusty. Yeah. It was like, what am I doing? This is not working out.
Yeah. And there is a weird, like, I feel like that reminds me of like when you go to like a cabin with your like 9 friends or whatever, and you're sort of like, and then we'll make
a big
dinner.
meal.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody's grabbing stuff, whatever. And then you get get there. And I feel like when you're at home, you just know where things are. If you're reading a recipe, you're like, yeah, okay, cool. And then put that on a sheet pan. And then you don't even think about it. And you get to that part of it and you're at the cabin and the tiny stove is like roaring. And you're like, okay, where's the sheet pan? And then you have to use like an unfolded Bud Light box.
Absolutely. Every single time. And I've had a friend come and cook at our house.
Don't do that, by the way.
Yeah.
Not anyone
That's
listening.
bad for fire. Bad for fire. Fire safety.
BFF. Bad for fire.
I had a friend come and cook at our house, and he literally pulled me aside. This was like a couple years ago, and he was like, I just want to let you know, you do not have good cooking stuff. And I was like, okay. And he was like, I'm not trying to be a jerk. But he's like, loves to cook and is a good. And he was like, you just need to. He also was like, your stove is terrible. He kind of just like ran me through, and he was right about all of it. And so we did get better cooking stuff to like, and I was like, oh yeah, cooking's easier when you don't have to worry about like stuff burning and like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's tough too. I mean, I do think there is a weird, like, I remember when I first got into cooking maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, I basically had like my roommate at the time and I had a sort of like, and I think as most people do in their 20s, a like weird assortment of things that have kind of funneled down from various apartments.
Mom's
and
house.
Different other people's like roommates have left things behind. This was in the apartment when you guys moved in like the very, very back of the cabinet.
Oh, yes.
Next to the portal to another dimension.
That's correct.
And it's a haunted pan. And you have to kind of like make it work a little bit. And there's like fun to that.
Yeah.
And then there's also a little bit of like an intimidation factor of like, if that's the kitchen that you have and you kind of want to like, I guess like step your game up a little bit cooking wise, it can be a little bit annoying. I feel like sometimes to feel like I got to get another like thing.
Yeah.
But I will say there is a weird sort of like, I feel like there's an RPG metaphor here that you play more video games than I do, so I'll rely on you to fully connect. But like, I've been playing Zelda for like the past year and a half. I can't.
Which one?
We can Breath of the Wild.
Hell
we can
yeah.
talk about that in a minute. But like, when you get towards the end of the game and you start and you're just like a little guy, and then by the end of the game you have like all this armor, and you like your friend is way further in the game than you, and you go over to their house and you see their guy, and you're like, oh my god, your guy's so crazy. Like, I feel like after cooking for a while and making those little sometimes annoying purchases of like, okay, let me actually get tongs or whatever, a lot of which you can get at IKEA, by the way. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Let me
like,
get a juicer.
I do feel like eventually once you're in that place where you can just sort of be reaching for stuff and you know where everything is, or God forbid something goes wrong and you're having to kind of like, you have a little bit of a make it work moment, as they say on Project Runway, which we both discussed watching earlier when we were eating. You know where that thing is, and it feels really good.
Yeah.
Like once you've built up that critical mass of stuff and little weird ingredients and things like that, like it's neat to just look at a recipe and go like, I have 8 out of 10 of those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's right. That is true. That is true. We also had a moment the other night where we were like, let's make popcorn. We haven't made popcorn in forever, and we have an air popper, and we like did some stuff to our house a while ago. So we like had moved out of our house, and people had come in and like taken everything out of our house and then put it back in. So we're still we thought we knew where everything was. The popcorn maker was missing one piece of plastic, and we were like, you can't really use it without it. And so the two of us we're like, we're going to have a great night. And instead we're like yelling at each other in our kitchen. I'm on my hands and knees looking into the back of the cabinet where the portal is. Kumail is like going through another cabinet, and we're like yelling like, I don't know where you, I didn't move it. I didn't do this. And then somehow one of us jolted a thing where espresso glasses were, and an espresso glass hit the floor and shattered into literally billions of pieces. And we're both in like bare feet, the cat's wandering around, and we're like, fucking popcorn. What are we doing with our lives? So then it took us an hour to clean everything up. I'm still pulling glass out of my body on a regular basis. And it turns out you can just make popcorn on the stove with like a pot and pan, like a pan and a lid.
Oh, really?
Which we did. Tasted amazing. Fuck you, air popper. I don't need you anymore.
Air popper.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't need you anymore. That's my other thing is you can overbuy and get all this equipment that you don't really need.
Yeah.
And he was like, we should just get the replacement. I was like, absolutely not. I'm getting rid of this thing today.
Yes.
We made better popcorn on the stove with stuff we have. We shattered an espresso glass, almost killed our cat. No.
And you have to do the like broken glass cat airlift where you're just like, okay, everyone.
That's exactly
out.
right.
Yeah, no, oh,
and
I know
just
it well.
kind of stepped over it. And then like, yeah, sometimes glass will just stay in your foot for multiple days. And then later you're like, oh, cool.
Oh, it's the pits.
Oh.
My dad got in this is when he was a teenager. So obviously he went on to sire me and stuff. It was fine. But he got in a like camping trip car accident where they went off a like rim, as it was described to me. And anyway, he wasn't that hurt, but he got like a piece of glass in his nose.
Oh.
And then it just like grew in there and he forgot about it. And then the story goes several months later, this is when he and my mom were dating, they kissed and the piece of glass fell out.
No.
Yes.
I'm so glad we're not eating anymore. That's
It like
gross.
reemerged.
Which is what it would do.
And that's why we call him Glassface. We don't call him Glassface.
Your mom should have left him
She's a
immediately.
neat lady and she's very metal. So she was into it. But I know what you mean where it's like those things that seem really neat because you're like, oh my God, this makes such and such this one task easier. And that's why I am pretty anti-gadget.
Yes.
I like to think of it in terms of being like tools over gadgets.
Yes.
Like if you have, there are so many things that are so like, they are like tongs, for example. I threw out that earlier, like just little things that once you have them, they make like 10 different things that you have to do all the time when you're cooking so much easier rather than that one really expensive thing that's like single use. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But that said, and this is where me being a guy with a beard who lives close to Silver Lake comes in, apparently with an air popper, I've never tried it, but you can roast coffee in an air popper.
That, of course you can. That sounds exactly right. That sounds exactly right.
Yes. I mean, if you're listening at home, just Google it before you actually try it.
Or
don't
you can make
yell at me when
popcorn.
This Is Us yourself.
Yeah.
Trying to make
spoilers.
coffee in an air popper. Somebody dies on the show. I've never even seen it. And I know that.
How dare you?
I thought the show was called This Is Us, The Forever Alive is the full name of the
No
show.
one dies on This Is Us. I have a question for you.
Please.
You said you got into cooking like 6 or 7 years ago. Why? How? Tell me everything.
So basically, my then girlfriend, now fiance, or maybe now wife, depending on when this comes out, because we're married in June.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, totally. So we were super into Top Chef, and we were just watching it all the time. I was really into it. And I really never cooked. I think I had one aborted attempt to make a like fancy French like steak thing for like maybe our first or second Valentine's Day that I completely screwed up. Mm-hmm. And so but I never really cooked. She cooked a decent amount and made really great stuff. And I thought it was really neat, but it was really a thing where I just thought that's not something I do and I never will. And anytime I ever attempted anything to do with it, my face would just get hot. Like I would have the feeling of like effectively being a kid who was really good at reading really young and got like overpraised. And so anytime they try anything new and they're not immediately good at it, they're just like, this is stupid. I'm not even, this is not what I'm good at. Never mind. You know, like that thing.
Okay.
And so I really didn't do it. We were watching Top Chef a lot. And one night she was out coaching an improv team and I got home earlier than her. And I was like, wouldn't it be neat if she got home and I had made dinner? Aww. So there was this site and I looked fairly recently. I think it's still active, called What the Fuck Do I Make for Dinner? Which is a tool that somebody made basically where you just go and it says like, what the fuck should I make for dinner? And you click the thing.
There's ingredients?
Mm-hmm. And it auto generates, or not auto generates, it like shows you a recipe and you click on it and it takes you to a recipe online. And then it will just give you one recipe and you say, I don't fucking like that. Or if it has meat in it, you say, I don't fucking eat meat. It swears a lot. It's very Deadpool. Cool. Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Now I'm on board.
This isn't your grandfather's random cooking recipe generator website.
We definitely gonna get an apron, but there'll be a hole in it for your dick.
So basically, you keep clicking until you find something. You're like, that seems like something I could actually make. And then in this case, I pretty quickly ended up on a recipe for seared snapper over succotash, which is alliterative in addition to being delicious. Or sibilant. It's all those things, I think.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, great, I'm going to do that. And I went to the grocery store and found all the stuff, and it was like vaguely intimidating because I didn't like know like the lay of the land. And anyway, ended up making it, and it turned out pretty good. And as I had pictured, she got home and was like, hey, you made dinner. Like, you know what I mean?
Aw,
Like,
what a good boyfriend you are.
Yeah, exactly. So like, yes, yeah, totally.
Get you an award.
It's interesting. Please. But I do think about it a lot and think about like what would have happened if that had also turned out bad.
If you had failed at that.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think sadly at that time in my life, I might not have kept doing it because I had not yet worked on the part of like, try something. If it doesn't work out, but you still really want to do it, keep doing it.
Yeah.
You don't have to like judge yourself off that first, like the example of like, nobody's mad at a baby because they don't know how to walk. They've never done it before. They have to learn. You know
That's
what I mean?
great. I've never heard that expression and I like it a lot.
But, and then there's somebody listening that's like, I'm fucking mad at a baby.
Yeah. I mean, they cry a lot. They're so loud.
My friends just had a baby and his mom said, you know, babies have a very limited repertoire.
Oh,
Which is my favorite thing.
The baby's like, how dare you? Kumail said that too,
baby.
that when his first time doing stand-up ever, he killed. And he was like, if I had not killed that first time, I don't know if I would have kept doing stand-up.
Isn't that wild?
Crazy to think about.
I know.
Yeah.
But
I'm good at everything I do the first time. And that's fine.
But I do think it's like, that is such an incredible, it's like, if you had to choose, I think in a vacuum, it's like, would you just be immediately great at like one thing, or would you be somebody where it's like, you might not be good at something the first time you try it, but you're somebody who's going to keep trying no matter what it is. It's like in a vacuum, I think a lot of people, myself mostly included, would probably just be like, I just want to be amazing at one thing.
Yeah.
But I think if you really had to choose, if you were smart, you would pick the second one because that will serve you for forever.
In many areas, and not just cooking, which is like kind of a little bit you have to do. Everybody has to be able to cook a little bit, unless you're a dad in the 50s. You have to be able to do...
In which case, you have to be able to drink a martini.
Absolutely. Come home and just, no, I don't want to talk about it, ma'am. Pour me a drink.
I'm going to get on the phone with your therapist. You can talk about how crazy you are.
Give you some more pills to make you normal. But I do think like it's a skill that like you will get many opportunities to do it because you kind of have to cook to be able to live a little bit.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Right. No, for sure. I do think like even if you're somebody who completely doesn't do it, learning how to be able to do it a little bit goes a long, long way. Like most people never will need to, or probably don't have the interest to be like really, really amazing home cooks that just like cook all the time and have a bunch of cookbooks and gear and whatever. But like, I think most people would find at some point they would be happy if they knew how to cook just like a little bit.
Just a couple things.
Because I do think it's like, whether it's like, oh, that reminds me of a question. Have you ever cooked for somebody on a date, or did you ever have somebody cook for you on a date? And if so, how did it go?
I've done both. I'm sure. I can't remember being cooked for. How sad is that? I'm sure a man has cooked for me at some point in my life. Oh my God. But I can't really, I'm sure one has. I'm sure. But, oh God. It's so
guys, we just cut it apart where Emily kept saying, I'm sure for 20 minutes. Like Howard Hughes in The Aviator.
This happened to me that my men do not, they make me mixtapes. That's what I got, but I didn't get a lot of.
And that's a really good skill. I had that one way before I knew how to cook. And it might have gone to seed a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, now I don't even, playlist. Absolutely not. I definitely have cooked. I think I cooked for Kumail pretty early on. There was like a weird event that like a lot of his friends were getting together for in Chicago. And he was like, well, we're supposed to bring something. And I was like, we had just started dating and I was like, I'll make something. Why did I say that? I don't cook. I don't know. And then I called my mom, and my mom, I'm very Southern, if you have not noticed. I'm very Southern. And my mom goes, just make sausage balls. Sausage balls are great. And I was like, absolutely. That's a great idea. So I made the dankest, weirdest little sausage balls in a Tupperware container to take to this like party. And Kumail like looked at them and he was so kind about it. He was like, well, they may not need them. And I was like, it was ill thought out on my part. A couple different, like, I just was like, I didn't think it through as much as I should have of like, what's a good like party food? I don't really know these people. I don't know their vibe, whatever. And it's like, I got the sausage balls. And that was also when I discovered that Kumail and his group of friends is the napkin guy, which means he's the most unreliable of all the people in his friend group. So they weren't even expecting anything from him. because he's the napkin guy.
Right. Meaning like he's going to bring napkins, if anything, or like.
No, like he was assigned napkins because he's probably going to fuck it up.
Gotcha. I see.
And when I got there, like sausage balls in hand that like we're trying to hide. And they're like, did you bring the napkins? And he was like, oh, I knew I was supposed to bring something. I was like, I am the sausage girl and I'm with the napkin guy. I don't know if this is working
and
out.
That's what we were holding on the statuette on top of our wedding cake.
And we have joked about them since. And so I would have like, it gives me a lot of anxiety to cook and have people eat it. And it's like, I don't mind people reading my writing. I don't mind people seeing things I've made, but for some reason, it feels very vulnerable to me. And so I don't love, it's hard for me to have people to like take something to a dinner party. So I'm more likely to pick something up and bring something. I'd rather spend money than risk. Like, the thing I hate is when someone takes a bite and goes, oh yeah. You know what I mean? That thing where like, it's not good. Right. And they know it and I know it. And like, why are you pretending? And then I'm like, you tell me it's bad. Because I know.
Be real with me. Shoot me straight.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do. I know I completely know what you mean. And there is that thing where and that's what I was kind of like touching on earlier in terms of like front porching it, where there's a part of you that wants to be like, I don't, it's whatever. But I'm sure you've had the experience of in your creative life of having to sort of like write something and like pour your heart into something and then like send it to somebody. Maybe it's somebody you like or don't like or whatever. And then have them like, they're just gonna put it in their eyeballs and then tell you what they think about it. And you like have to do it.
Yeah. That doesn't bother me at all.
Interesting.
And I've gotten more comfortable with it because I've just had way more practice at it as of late, but I'm anxious a little bit, of course, but I'm not, if I think something's good, I'm hard on myself. So if I think something's good, then I'm not worried that you're going to hate it. I'm not.
Right.
But when it comes to cooking, I think either I don't know how to judge it for myself or like, I don't know what it is, but I'm very anxious about the cooking thing.
Kind of feels like maybe you're just not that confident about it. And so you're bringing that into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm from a Southern family that's very much like you do apologize. You can't take a compliment. You apologize for everything you do before you fucking do it. If someone tells you something's good, you're like, oh, fuck you, a piece of, I'm a nightmare. And that came out of the trash. Like you can't ever say thank you for anything. So I think maybe that's a thing I connect with my home. Because my mom cooked obviously a lot. She was like a classic homemaker type. So like that's a thing that she did that I don't feel confident in. Whereas writing is a thing that I can handle this. Like, give me criticism on this. I'm ready. Whereas cooking, I'm not as good at, oh God, I'm coming to realizations. I'm not as good at my mom as this stuff. And so it's hard for me to put that out into the world.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel like do you feel like she had an expectation of you in that arena, or whether consciously or unconsciously?
Maybe a little tiny bit, but she was more like, she really wanted us to be into gardening, my sister and I, and that we also both fail at that. So like, she's given me like recipes, like handwritten recipes of hers and stuff. And those are like treasured items, but also I don't make any of them because there's a lot of like, oh, that's what my mom does. And wow, I'm really coming into some shit here. That's the thing my mom's amazing at. And she also worked, by the way. It was the 80s. It's not like she wasn't, but she loved making dinner for us.
Yeah, the shoulder pads mom I did too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And job was tough, but she took it what you could because you gotta. But
I'm already hearing Let the River Run by Linda Ronstadt playing.
But she cooking was like something she's really, really good at. And she doesn't do as much anymore.
Interesting. So she's like because I do feel like that happens. Like, I think one of my grandparents was saying like your grandfather, like he basically said like 10 years ago, like he used to do it a lot. And then he just said like, I'm done. There is no cooking. It's a little bit of a joke when we go home that like my mom will be like, I've been cooking all day. And you get there and it's like, there are crackers and stuff set out. And you're like, what was she cooking? Yeah, I really
if you're
feel
listening to this, I love you so much, Mom. You're the best, and all your food is great. Sorry.
I feel like in a weird way, like I completely know what you mean, where I feel like a lot of people like you have this weird ships passing in the night experience, or ships going in two different directions, I guess, or something, some nautical metaphor with your parents, where as I think our generation's getting a little bit older and maybe there's just more talk of like artisanal food and handmade and whatever. And like mom used to make and grandma and whatever, and these family recipes. And that's where things come from, is very vaunted. By the same token, those actual people are getting older. And while we're discovering all that, they're like, I discovered Costco. You know what I mean? Like they're just going like, I discovered Trader Joe's. I don't know why I'm doing this accent. Nobody in my family talks like that. And it's not a good accent either. But they're just going like, I discovered like at Trader Joe's, they have like a little shrimp stir fry that you can put on. And I know there's a lot of sodium in there, so I have to watch it, but it's pretty dang good on a weeknight. And they're right.
My parents love Trader Joe's.
Yeah. And Trader Joe's is great. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that's basically just going like, it's all that type of food is getting better and better. And they're just going like, I don't necessarily feel like it all the time, which makes sense. Even though in my head, as somebody who's really passionate about cooking at this time in my life, I go, but if you're retired and you have all this time, why wouldn't you just be like out in the garden, like looking at a tomato for a while? Like, isn't that where you want to?
And your mom's like, I raised your ass and cook for you all the time. No, thank you.
Yes. Exactly. And so it is interesting where it's like, you want them to be that person.
Now, because I didn't appreciate it then, but I do now.
Yes. And it is interesting where it's like, I always thought of my stepmom as a really good cook because she would cook everything that her mom cooks. And she's Italian. So her mom is this Pittsburgh Italian woman who has all the great like red sauce recipes and never measures a thing. And she's that grandma. And we got her relatively late in life because my dad got married when I was in high school. So it was like brand spanking new Italian grandma, never been a grandma before, never been driven. You know what I mean?
That's
like,
exciting.
It was just like full Italian grandma energy, which is the big dick energy. What's that?
Undiluted.
Yes, precisely. Exactly. And
Did you say it was the new big dick energy?
Italian grandma energy is the new big dick energy.
I think that's right.
Or it always has been. But so there's more pizzelles involved. So I always thought of my stepmom as being a really good cook. And to me, she is, absolutely, because she would make all that stuff. And then my dad died a few years ago, and my dad was the big cook of our family. But I never really realized it. I kind of like took it for granted. But he would like pretty much always make dinner, and pretty much always did, even back like when my mom was alive, and like he was the one who was cooking more often than not. And so when he died, she kind of went like, oh man, like I don't really cook anything. I want to be like, what are you talking about? You make all this stuff. And then that's when I realized like, oh, but she's basically like, these are the things that I make.
Wow.
But it's really neat now where she is kind of going like, I'm kind of getting some stuff and I'm doing the salmon. And she like, she tries to eat really healthy, and she's just like exploring stuff for the first time and cooking things that are outside of what her mom used to make. And it's really neat. So I don't want to like generalize and say like all people that are getting older or all people our parents' generation are like not cooking anymore. It's sort of like she's having this sort of like
renaissance.
Exactly. Where it is sort of like she's discovering all that stuff for herself. And it's neat to talk to her, and some nights she'll be like, I didn't really like it, or I kind of screwed it up, or whatever. But then other times she'll be like, you know what? I really liked that salmon. That was really, which is neat. And it's cool to watch that and sort of go like, okay, you seem to have a relatively healthy relationship with this, where you could sometimes you can go like, that was really good. I really like that. I did a good job. I'm going to make that again. That's neat. Cool. Yeah, totally.
Camille's mother is maybe one of the best cooks I've ever experienced in my entire life. She is amazing. She can cook. She cooks Pakistani food better. I mean, I've never had anything in a restaurant that even comes close to what she makes. And I've never heard her say, this wasn't very good. I think that every single thing that she makes, she's like, fuck yeah.
That's awesome.
I did this. Like, because she has so much joy and pride in it. And it is amazing. Right. So it's like, and that's a big thing when we go in to like stay with them. She's just like, here's the menus. First day, we're going to do this. Second day, we might go out, but we might not, because I might do this. And you're like, you just, it's like a lot of food,
awesome. But
it is so delicious.
I think I'm imagining being Camille's mom when I'm older.
Yeah. You should be
do worse.
Mom.
Sorry, you were saying.
She's just amazing. And it's such a great, it's a little bit how we bond too when I'm there. Cause she knows that I don't cook very much, but like there's a thing called hunter beef. That's a Pakistani dish that Camille really loves. And I tracked down a recipe. He was like having a bad time. So I had to get all these ingredients from all over the place. I made it. And then I was like showing her, and she was so proud of me. And it was like, and somehow the expectation isn't there because I was not ever going to be amazing at this. It's my first time trying this. And she was like so proud of me. Right. And I did an okay job at the hunter beef. It only took me like a week to put together. It was the longest process of my life.
Could you briefly summarize
You have to dry the beef out. Hunter beef is like the specific kind of dried beef. So you have to cook the beef, then dry it out. And then the sauce that goes with it just requires an avalanche of things that I literally was like ordering stuff from like Chinese food stores. Like it's hard to like, cause we don't really have a good Desi like grocery store here. There's India Sweets and Spices, but like it's hard to get this stuff sometimes. So I was like texting her, like, I want to do this for Kumail. And I think it made her very happy. So it's been cool to like have that kind of relationship with her.
That's awesome.
Because we have that and Celebrity Gossip, or those are our two main.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's super cool. Do you ever get to like, you don't have to say in particular, but do you ever get to be like, hey, we met so-and-so, not so hot or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, do you ever get to?
Every once in a while, but for some reason.
You're more like front page, like Us Weekly. Oh, that's
we like to talk about
the public access
hot
stuff.
goss.
Everything.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We like to get into hot goss. But yeah, having the pride she takes in it. And not that my mom doesn't, but my mom is not she's just not prideful.
Right.
It's not a Southern thing. Whereas Kumail's mom takes pride in what she makes, and she is really good at it. And it's kind of awesome.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so cool to me too about like via like text or whatever, she's able to like send you the recipe.
Yeah.
And then you go and you source all the stuff. And thankfully we live in LA. So it's like, there's so many amazing places to seek out sort of, different pockets of different communities and like their foods and stuff like that. But then you're able to kind of like recreate it like in your guys' kitchen.
Yeah.
Like I was just thinking about that the other day in terms of like recipes and plays are kind of and I guess sheet music is like, I don't know what this like art form is called, but where it's like a printed thing that's basically instructions for making a thing
a creature.
But it is an art form in and of itself in a weird way. But it is like, you can kind of like, if you just sent a play across the world, it's like they could put up their production of the play.
And it would be very different possibly than the one that you would make if you were putting on the play.
Yeah, totally. Which is like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that. And then you kind of like get to sort of like, it's so cliche. You can't talk about cooking without sounding like the biggest fucking dork in the world. But like, you sort of get to be like, we're bringing that here a little bit. And it's sort of like recreating. I would imagine for him, it's probably like a bajillion Ratatouille moments of like, you know what I mean?
Like stuff he hasn't had since childhood, because you can't really get Hunter beef anywhere in the States that we've been able to find so far.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So I did like a bastard version. He was like this, like the sauce was like spot on. The beef part was tough.
Right.
It was a little tough, but it was cool. I should do that again.
That's really neat. I feel like it's interesting. It's one of those things that is interesting and neat about getting older and like having an older generation, like your parents and your significant other's parents and other people. But like, it's interesting with cooking, and you were saying your mom maybe doesn't take as much pride in it or doesn't do it as much anymore. Kumail's mom takes a ton of pride in it, where it is like people have a weird relationship to it that they might not even understand.
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like
true.
Sometimes.
Very
true. I feel like sometimes you do encounter, or I've heard of, the sort of feeling where it's like, on the one hand, yes, please, when you're home, come cook and whatever, that'll be great. But then by the same token, like people's parents or grandparents, sometimes it's like they're a little bit like, that's what I do. And this is part of my value proposition to the family. You know what I mean? I run
into that too. And I now have a thing worked out with my family where I make breakfast. My mom would always like get up and kind of stress out about breakfast. And I was like, can I just it's important to me. I want it. And once I was like, I want to do this, when I go home now, I make breakfast for everyone. And she like basically lets me. She kind of like, she hovers. She makes it a little difficult, but she doesn't want to do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's like, I can tell she doesn't want to do it, and she'll do it because she loves me, but I'm like, I love you too, so let me do it. Like, we all like each other.
Right. No, I know exactly. Yes, but it is a weird and I think that's so interesting. And I feel like I remember hearing about like my dad and my grandma, my stepmom's mom. Like, finally, I feel like in the past few years before my dad died, they had finally figured out the balance in the kitchen around like the holidays, and they were like moving around the island and they were doing it. And I think my stepmom was like, fucking finally, because this was making my life miserable, because it's two people where it's like they both really like to cook. It's really important to their identities and their families and whatever, and their experience of like holidays, which are really just about your family. But
only if it's done this way.
Yes, exactly. Yes, precisely. Where it's just like, and I think they had finally reached that weird yin and yang thing where it's like, okay, we're doing a little bit of what you want to do and a little bit of what I want to do, and we're helping each other out, and we've like reached this equilibrium.
That's great.
But it's not easy to come by.
Yeah.
I mean, from everything to like you're cooking in somebody else's kitchen to like, just weird other emotional expectational.
It's tough. It's like a symptom of like, it's everything. It's everything. I mean, that's what most things are in families in general. Like if you give a family like a puzzle to solve, and because I was a family therapist for a long time, you'll see everything you need to see watching them solve a puzzle together. Like if you give them Play-Doh and tell them to make something, you're like, okay, you're the problem. You're terrible. Like, well, okay, some people are okay, but you can kind of see because it's in everything.
And you heard it here first from a real therapist. Someone is always the problem.
When they come in, that's absolutely true.
I totally know what you mean. So what is your like go-to breakfast thing when you're home?
I usually make oatmeal for everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you like toppings and stuff?
Yeah. And I do like toppings, and I'm a slow cooked. I never do the microwave. Ooh. Yeah. And so I do that, or sometimes I'll just do like toast and eggs for people. I just kind of make a hodgepodge of things. And then most recently it was my whole family was home, including my sister. And she walked into the kitchen and was like, what are you doing? Because she usually doesn't stay in the house because she lives closer, blah, blah, blah. That's boring. But I was like, yeah, this is what I do now. When I visit the parents, I like make breakfast. And she was like, touche. So it was very exciting for her. But so yeah, we're all still kind of like adjusting to it. Right. And when they visit me, I like either cook or we'll go somewhere for breakfast. I can do breakfast okay. Right. I can handle breakfast.
Yes. Yeah. That's really, I think it's so interesting about like getting older and finding those when it's like you're sort of shifting and your generation is all shifting into your parents' roles and stuff. And it does get I
think it would be more interesting if any of us had kids. A lot.
Gotcha.
I do think that kind of like with people I know that have kids, like it seems easier, like an easier transition. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of grown-ups walking around.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. I remember there was I don't have kids. My brothers don't have kids. But like, I remember there was a larger family Christmas before like any of my cousins had kids either. And it was a weird feeling where you're all just like, just a bunch of people.
Just a bunch of adults sitting around.
And it is a little bit like, I'm not by no means somebody where I'm like, everybody should have kids or nobody should have kids or whatever. Like whatever you want to do totally makes sense and is fine. But I do think there was a weird part of my brain that tickled and was like, somebody's got to start shitting out some kids. You know what I mean? Like there's just some part of that like biological imperative that was just like, oh, right, we're supposed to
we need something to focus on.
A kid is just supposed to streak through with a way too loud toy that somebody's mad at somebody else for having gotten him for Christmas. That's how the species perpetuates.
I mean, animals also fill in quite well for that, I will say. Oh. And then my best friend has a 6-year-old that I've like been like, tag team, get in here. We need some help.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yay. No, for sure. And it is just like, everyone, it's fine. I'm not trying to be like, everyone should have, that's not what I'm on my high horse about. But I'm on my high horse about other stuff. So when you and Camille, like when you said you guys cook in tandem, what are you guys making?
We'll usually just like pick a thing and be like, we'll just pick a random recipe and be like, we're going to make this recipe. So it's usually, sometimes it's Pakistani food. We make dal pretty well together, which is like a lentil dish that has like spices and stuff. Sometimes we'll make like a chicken biryani kind of situation. I would say mostly when we're cooking together, it's Pakistani food.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I was just reading a thing with an Indian chef who just came out with a cookbook called Indian-ish that I'm excited about and I want to check out. But she was saying she has like a doll diagram in the book that they like reprinted in the New York Times and it was super cool. And she was saying it's a cliche, but she was like all like Indian kids grow up being like, I fucking hate doll. I'm so tired of it. Mom always makes it. And then they get to a certain age that she was like, we all get to be adults. I'm like, it's the perfect fucking food. Like when you're an adult on a weeknight, you can actually make it. And it did make me be like, I gotta.
It's so good. Make that. And it's pretty easy to make. And it is amazing. It tastes great. Yeah.
And it just seems like one of those things where it's like, it's not just a recipe or a specific dish, it's a genre. Yeah. And there's so many different cool variations on it and things you can do. And
depends on the color of lentil you buy and then the spices that you put into it. And yeah, it's a whole thing.
Did you, when you were making that hunter beef, did you enjoy that sourcing all the ingredients thing or was that like?
A little resource management. Right. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was fun to like track stuff down. Right. It was fun. It's kind of, and then sometimes you have to like, I would have to look at the ingredients, like what comes in this spice mix that was recommended. Can I just get those items? Because that was the next level. There's a very popular company called Shan that makes like Pakistani spice kits that go like, if you want to make this, here's a spice kit, put chicken, put whatever, and then you get the meal. And then at one point, it was either Camille's brother or his mom was like, well, those are amateur. You were supposed to make the spice kits yourself. Like you create. And I was like, oh, I'm not ready. I'm not ready for that.
Yeah, I do feel like I love India Sweets and Spices is an awesome store that you were talking about. And I do feel like there's one aisle where it's like all the stuff where it's clearly like, yeah, exactly. Like with that stuff where it's like, realistic moms with like a lot of young kids are probably like, okay, we're doing that. It's a weeknight. Let's go. And then like, but I know what you mean. And I find myself, I haven't cooked any Pakistani food. I've cooked a little bit of Indian, and I always find myself in those recipes being like, I gotta make the spice thing. Like there's just a part of my brain that's like, I gotta do it.
I had to pickle beets for a thing once, and I was like, why am I pickling beets? People make these already much better than I could ever make them. Yeah, I don't need to do this. So the first time I did, I tried to pickle it. And then the second time, there was a sandwich I really loved in New York at a restaurant called Salty. And I got the cookbook and like learned how to make the sandwich myself.
I have the Salty's Clean Slate sandwich in a cookbook.
What?
And called Power Vegetables. And it's a neat cookbook. And I haven't made it because it's like basically bringing together like 6 different side recipes in the book, including like pickled beets. One of them is like you make your own naan, which like we've made. And it's
I had to make my own focaccia, motherfucker. It was too much. You can buy that.
You have to. I felt that way about like every book you ever read, every cookbook is always, the chefs are always like, gotta make your own chicken stock, gotta make your own chicken stock, gotta make it. And I'm like, but look, Rachel Ray, she comes in a box.
Yeah.
She's orange and she's great. You know what I mean? Like, and I do, that's something that I haven't quite gotten to that level yet where I'm like, I gotta make stock. I aspire to that.
Sure.
But I do think like one of my best friends, Maggie, is a really amazing cook. And one of her superpowers is basically like, she knows when to do all the stuff. And she also knows when to be like, we can just get that
store-bought's better.
Because it's real, you're making food in the real world.
And if it's a barrier for entry, then it's like, what do you want to cook the thing? Or do you want to like, just like have this massive, horrible thing that you hate that's going to be happening?
Exactly. If there was like, how do I put this? Because I guess with this part of what I want to do with this podcast is just like capture the feeling of like, you can have people over for dinner and you can like do this type of stuff. Like where, let's say you go to a friend's house for dinner, like they have you and Kumail or just you over for dinner. What's like the best case scenario? What's like the worst case scenario? Or have you ever gone over to a friend's house and had like a particularly great time when they had you over for dinner, or particularly not?
I think it's always been great the times that it's happened. I think it's like, I like it to be low key. What I'm not a big fan of is the like cocktail hour. And then because I haven't grown up with like a dinner party mentality. I don't know anything about that. I'm from a family that's like potluck. Like that's what you do. So to me, I get anxious when I go to a friend's house and we've had this where they like open the door and they're dressed like in a cocktail dress and they're like, well, there'll be snacks over here. And by the way, I have a great time with those, but I feel like, oh, I'm performing.
Sure.
Like I feel I prefer more laid back. Like, oh, I made some food. Let's eat. And preferably like, I like sitting around a table and eating, but I don't want it to be like, I don't know. I'm just not in the super formal thing.
Right.
Cocktail hour makes me nervous.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like Haley and I have people over a lot and we've come to really like the cocktail hour part because it's like, she's really into like making cocktails and she's really good at flavors and stuff like that. But by the same token, it also, or not by the same token, but just in general, it kind of is like, if we're finishing up something back there, it's a way to like have stuff for people while things are like being finished or coming to an end. Or it's sort of like, gives you a little bit of wiggle room, I feel like. But I know what you mean from like the guest perspective, where it's like, on the one hand, coming in, I like a drink or I like saying hi to the people who are like, especially if I'm friends with the other people. But I know what you mean, where it's like, can be kind of a distinct vibe. And there's a real virtue in the sort of like, we made a pot of something, it's already on the stove. Yeah. Here's some bowls. You can kind of serve yourself. Like maybe we're watching something. Like both of those fall under the umbrella of dinner party.
Absolutely.
I feel like.
And I've had a great time at absolutely both things. Right. 100%. I just like, I tend to like want to be a little bit more casual overall.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I feel like that's awesome for people out there to hear, because I do think I definitely had in my head a long time before we started having dinner parties. Like if you're having a dinner party, you have to have a dinner party.
See,
you know what I mean?
And that's what I would be concerned about. That's why I don't throw them.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think it's like the one that you're describing where it's sort of like maybe people are bringing stuff. It's more potluck. It's more whatever, is also a dinner party. If there's food that you made, or even just like, we really like this thing and we ordered out, it's still a dinner party. Yeah. Sometimes, I can't remember the thing I was reading, but they were basically going like, some of the best dinner parties I ever went to were like in New York, teeny tiny postage stamp apartment. It's the 70s. Everybody's an artist. There's like one rotisserie chicken that somebody picked up from around the corner
like
and way too much booze.
Yeah.
Like, why not? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I think like removing that, you were talking about barriers to entry earlier, removing that like mental thing of like only one of those things is a dinner party. It's like you and your guests could totally be way happier if you just like do the thing that's easy and not stressful. And that way you're not projecting stress when people walk in, which I've come to realize now as we've been entertaining more and more. It's like people don't like it when there's like a big clatter in the kitchen and like a weird like trash can and like cat running away noise like in a cartoon. Like,
I can't talk right now. I'm like, oh no, why are we here?
A good time either. Yes, exactly.
And I've gone to 2 fancy-ish ones recently that are both, the host could not have been like calm, cool, collected. Like one of them had a chef, so they're of course calm. But like, yeah, I like as long as people are relaxed when I get there, because I will take on whatever energy you're putting out and I will give it back to you tenfold. So you know, if you're anxious, then I'm gonna be like, should I have brought something? Is everything okay? And then it just splatters out of control.
And then final question: if there was anything from your childhood, like a food item, be it something that your family would make or something you would just eat, that you could like either know how to recreate or just snap your fingers and have it appear, what would it be?
My mom made Swedish meatballs that weren't really Swedish meatballs, but were something that she invented, but she called them Swedish, because I've had Swedish meatballs since and I'm like, absolutely not. This is not. I should just ask her for that recipe because I would love them and I crave them all the time. And Are they distinct from the sausage balls? Oh, yes. Oh, everything's ball shaped. Anything that I'm into.
A lot of not meatballs, but meat space balls.
Cheese balls. Yes. That's a very southern.
Balls are great.
Everything is ball shaped. Yes. So yeah, they are a separate item, and they just have always been delicious. And I kind of don't know. I should ask her how to make them because I haven't thought about them in a long time, but yeah.
You got to get it.
Yeah, I got to get it.
This could be the moment you finally ascend to whatever your mythical idea of.
Or crash and burn.
And then go like, hey, that's fine.
That's right. I'll do it again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Emily Gordon, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
This was a lot of fun. I came to some realizations about myself, which doesn't usually happen on podcasts.
I feel like it only happens on podcasts, sadly.
That's right. It's one of the two. It either never happens or always. Every single podcast, I'm like, and my dad, I guess, was scared of me. That's my whole thing. I don't go to therapy, but I just like work shit out. And they're like, this is about cats. Why are you talking about your dad? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for having me.
That'll be $75 is your copay. You have terrible insurance.
I do.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
So Emily Gordon just took off, and that was awesome. She's the best. I love Emily so much. I could not have wished for a better first guest for the show. That was so cool. She's just always so full of anecdotes and insights, and I loved it. Please check out Little America on Apple TV Plus. She's the coolest. And you can follow her on all relevant social media. And you can follow me on all relevant social media at Stay for Dinner Pod on Instagram, at Stay for Dinner on Twitter. And if you cook along with the show, if you make this fettuccine Alfredo, whether or not it's with fresh pasta, I would just die if you would take a picture of it and hashtag it Stay for Dinner Pod. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, ideas, stuff that you want to see me cook or hear me cook, people that you want me to have on the show, angry stuff about that I said that they put sawdust in pre-grated cheese, please direct all that stuff to my email, stayfordinnerpod@gmail.com. You can follow me personally on Twitter at DC Pierson, or on Twitter. I said that right. And then on Instagram at DEECEE Pierson, because I got on Instagram in 2019. My theme song is July 4th, 2004 by Jason Anderson. You can find that on Spotify on the album So Long. And my interstitial music was Motion Juice instrumental by Advanced Bass, the amazing Owen Ashworth.
Guys, you would do me such a favor if you would rate and subscribe to the show wherever you do such things. And other than that, I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.